Welcome back to the Road to Great Health podcast, where we discuss natural solutions to today's worst health problems. I'm Dr. Kevin Lenderman from South Louisiana from Dr. Kevin's Wellness Clinic, and I'm joined by my mentor, Dr. Rob DeMartino out of Superior Health Solutions in Vegas. Doc, how's it going?
Doing great, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, and I'm happy to move into a new area today. And so, for our audience, guys, in today's show, we are going to talk about the single most dangerous substance in the human body. It is the most dangerous. It's like right up there with plutonium. And of course, we're talking about cholesterol today. And you guys may have a different idea about cholesterol in the human body whenever we finish today's show, right, Doc?
I hope so. I hope you have a very different view of cholesterol by
Yeah.
then.
It's a killer. It's the most dangerous thing ever.
I know. Yeah. No. And it's so dangerous that 80% of it that we find in your body makes.
Right.
Right. So yeah, that math ain't mathin', right?
Yeah. No, which by the way, statins are a $400 billion business. And so,
And
I,
there's
I,
your
I
answer.
hope you guys will get a different idea of what's going on. And to touch on a little something that Dr. Rob said there, your body makes 80% of it. So in functional medicine, and Dr. Rob tells us this all the time, we don't really feel like your body is stupid. Your body does things for a reason. In the medical field, your body's stupid. It's raising your blood pressure again. Take this medicine. Oh, your body's stupid. It's raising your blood sugar. We've got to move. We've got to fix it. We feel like your body's pretty smart, and it's not going to do things to kill itself.
Yeah. If it's doing something wrong, you have to change your viewpoint on it. The question is not it's dumb in doing that. It's why would it do that? Because almost
Right.
everything that you see going wrong in your body is a compensation trying to solve a different problem, right? So change that thought process, and all of a sudden, health takes a very different outlook.
Right, right. And so we're going to get into all the details about cholesterol today and what it's used for and when is it bad and when is it not bad and some of the testing that's involved that we really should be doing and most people are really surprised to learn that cholesterol is the precursor for a lot of really good things in your body.
Pretty much all your hormones, right? Pretty much
Yeah.
all your hormones, cholesterol becomes precursor towards, which is why your body makes so much of it. And one of the more important ones that I always find people don't know is a lot of people, when we talk to them, when they come in, they'll know that vitamin D is made from the sun. Obviously, we've talked about that plenty in these podcasts, but they don't know that vitamin D is made from the sun, but it's made from cholesterol. So your body makes cholesterol, and that cholesterol has to get then converted into vitamin D, which goes back to this ideology that vitamin D is in fact not really a vitamin; it's a hormone. It's what they call a prohormone. So, even from that perspective, there is a lot of processes in your body that need and function off of cholesterol, which has been this demonized molecule, like you said, purely just to sell statins.
Yeah, and so like we were saying, the body is not stupid. So let's just see. My vitamin D is low, so I'm going to need to make more cholesterol to bring up my vitamin D. And so your body does things for a reason.
Yeah, if somebody's got low vitamin D, their cholesterol is going to be high. Like it's just absolute. Now, here's the kicker: if you take vitamin D, the cholesterol that your liver has made that's going to be sequestered to the side, say, okay, we're going to use this to make vitamin D, it stays high anyways. So now, whether you low in vitamin D, your body makes more cholesterol. If you take vitamin D and you bypass that, the body that set the cholesterol aside doesn't get used and your cholesterol stays high. So, those two patterns happen, all the time. And they're like, I have no idea why my cholesterol's high. I'm like, well, I got a pretty sneaking suspicion it has to do with this number.
Yeah. Your vitamin D's a 7. Right.
Yeah, it's in single digits. I mean, it's pretty darn rare. I sat with somebody, actually, it was this morning, and this is his 3-month check-in, and his vitamin D's at 74, and
Nice.
clean, no
Yeah.
supplements, no nothing. I mean, this guy is like, you couldn't ask for somebody. He's like, Coach. He calls me Coach.
Yeah.
Coach,
Yeah.
tell me what to do. I will do it. He's like, look at my skin. He lays out there every day. I was like, man, I am so proud of you. I could pick you up and give you a hug right
Yeah.
now. He's bigger than me.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And so here's the other thing about cholesterol is brain health. Something like 25% of your cholesterol is in your brain and it's used for functioning of your brain.
Yeah, it's about, so you got to figure your brain's what, 2% of your body weight. It's going to handle about 25% of the total cholesterol in your body is going to be in your brain. And of that, about 30% of it is structure, and about 70% of it actually makes up the myelin. So
Right.
myelin, most people know myelin related to multiple sclerosis, right? That's what gets damaged. But myelin is basically insulation around your nerves. So the better your myelin is, the faster you can signal, right? So the better your insulation is, the faster you can send electrical current. The faster you can send electrical current, the smarter, the sharper, the more adaptive that your brain is. So most of that cholesterol is there to make sure that that brain is firing at top speed.
Yeah, so the myelin that he's talking about is like the rubber on the extension cord. It insulates the copper wires. And so it's just so important to brain function and nerve function. And Dr. Rob and I, we find bad myelin in patients all the time, and it's super, super important. It almost never gets talked about.
Yeah, again, unless it's multiple sclerosis, it rarely ever gets talked about. But if you want nerves to signal faster, myelin is the solution in order to be able to do that. And just in general, the more electrical current that the body can carry, which is directly equal to how much myelin they have around their nerves, the faster regenerative capacity that they have, the faster their body will heal. There is a direct correlation between these two things.
Yeah. And because that all takes place in the brain, there is a direct correlation to lower cholesterol and higher rates of dementias and Alzheimer's and all the other neurological disorders, which, by the way, there's been a 680% increase in neurological disorders since they really started crashing everyone's cholesterol. So, it's definitely an important thing. And I know Dr. Rob and I talk about this story a lot, and especially during the last administration. They published the president's medical records, and during the last administration, they published President Biden's medical records, and they were bragging that his cholesterol was a 100. And Dr. Rob and I are looking at each other like, yeah, that's not good for the brain. And
Yeah.
and we were possibly seeing some neurological deficits there. And I don't think either one of us are real surprised when his cholesterol was dangerously low.
Yeah, it actually said in the, only people like us read presidential medical records, right? Right.
Yeah.
So it actually said in there like we're thrilled with his cholesterol levels. They had him on 3 different statins. Now he'd had strokes in the past. He was on 3 separate statins, and I'm sitting there watching this poor guy struggle on this national stage, and I'm thinking to myself, he might be fine. They're medicating him into this purely with this ideology of, oh, we're trying to prevent him from having a stroke. But this is probably a medicated state that if they took him off of that and they correctly moved his cholesterol levels up, there's a safe and a not safe way of doing that, and got it back up to a normal range. I was like, I wonder how okay he might be. Right. And this isn't political. This is a human being that you're sitting there watching going, they're hurting him,
Yeah.
right? For trying to solve one problem and you create probably a more catastrophic one on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. Doc, talk a little bit about one of the other benefits that I've heard you say several times, as cholesterol is used as a patchwork. And I think the example you gave was like if you have a nail hole in your wall and you want to patch that and you put spackling over that to cover that nail hole. Talk a little bit about how cholesterol is used to patch inflammatory areas and the inflammation in the arteries, and how that's what really plaquing is caused from. Is that inflammation and that damage to the artery walls, and that's where a lot of the cholesterol plaquing actually comes from. Talk a little bit about that.
So we always talk about the worry about cholesterol is it just has to do with plaquing, right? Or is it going to block up your arteries? Is it going to not make the blood be able to flow through? But really, it's a bigger window into how your brain, your stomach, and your gut and your liver is really working kind of in a sense together, right? Because basically that ideology that LDL is bad cholesterol and HDL is good is a complete oversimplification and kind of a misnomer, right? Your body uses both for very specific reasons. So most people are aware of the term leaky gut, right? So if your nervous system is not firing fast and your small intestine gets sluggish, now all of a sudden that food that sits in there for a while those barriers that hold your gut lining together, they can get leaky and they open up and things start to spill out. Well, your body uses LDL, quote unquote, the bad cholesterol, to actually try to patch up those openings. And then your body uses HDL cholesterol to try to neutralize any toxins that got out of the digestive system and entered the liver portal. So when you see this ideology of LDL high and HDL low, which is the typical pattern that you will run into, the body is losing energy from somewhere and the entire system is getting slow. That's ultimately what that means. And if you see this combination of LDL high and vitamin D low, there's a good chance autoimmune disease is going on somewhere inside the system. So they always worry about the ideology of total cholesterol. And frankly, the biggest thing when it comes to plaquing is the ratio correct, right? The ratios between the cholesterols, like people can have cholesterol of 300. If their ratios are really good, they don't plaque. But like you were saying, the plaque really becomes, if we damage the blood vessels because of inflammatory stuff, the LDL will go on top of it. And it's basically like a scab. And if you think of it like, if I cut my arm and I grow the scab, it's not level, right? It goes up. Right? It raises a little bit. So it raises a little bit. But if it keeps doing it, it has to keep trying to patch and patch and patch. And eventually the surface is not flat anymore. But we're looking at it incorrectly. We're saying, oh man, you're clogging, but we're not asking, hey, why is that scabbed over? Why is that damaged? Why are you trying to keep patching that up? Why does that keep leaking? You get back to these ideologies, everything is leaking. And things leak because ultimately, in a simplistic manner, we get into energetic debt.
Yeah.
But they manipulated this data based off of a few studies that they've done. And the studies were purely designed to change levels of what they looked at on lab work to try to basically sell more statins. Like you said, statin's been the number one drug in the country since they introduced it. It's still the number one drug today. It'll probably be the number one drug 10 years from now. But they're selling it on this odd ideology of what it does. And meanwhile, we're missing the big picture of what this actually tells us inside of somebody's system instead of just giving up like, hey, you're stupid and you're making too much cholesterol. Or it's food-based.
Yeah.
Right? Remember, they always blame it on your diet. 20% of your cholesterol in your body will come from diet. The other 80% is what you make, right? So what do you want to focus on? You want to focus on the 20% or the 80%?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are 30 years beyond looking at LDL and HDL in the science. And so talk a little bit about the more important markers. And I know when our blood work, we look at ApoB and lipoprotein A. And so let's talk a little bit about the first one. Tell me about apoprotein B and why that's much more important than total cholesterol or LDL, because what we do, we do an advanced cholesterol test on all of our patients called cholesterol fractionization. And that's the way we should be measuring if a patient has a cholesterol burden that's a problem or not. And so before we get into HDL, Doc, let's talk a little bit about apoprotein B, LDL, and lipoprotein A, and what are the differences in all those?
Okay, so really the biggest thing that we're looking at here is not just lumping all LDL as bad and all HDL as good, right? There are certain LDLs that are good. There are certain LDLs that are bad. There are certain HDLs that are good. There are certain HDLs that are bad, right? So we need to be able to be a little bit more detailed rather than just saying, hey, we got LDL. Like when we measure LDL, it just counts all the LDL. It doesn't tell us whether it's good or bad or indifferent. But when you do it the way that we do, when we pull that apart, you start getting real specific ideologies. So when you want cholesterol to be in the system, you want it to be kind of fat and fluffy, like a pillow, so that it'll kind of go around and it bounces around. But if they get small and dense and sticky, that's what's going to get stuck in your system, right? So we don't want that sluggishness, right? We don't want that system going slow, because if that cholesterol sits in your liver for too long and then it gets inflamed, now it's going to change it from this nice, big and soft and fluffy type to these small and dense and hard types. And then when they're sticky, they're going to get stuck. And if they're not sticky, they're just going to bounce around and kind of go off onto their merry way. So when we look at ratios and we kind of fraction this out, saying, okay, we've got some types like ApoB is really sticky, right? Like that's really, really, LPA, really sticky, right? And when people tell you have genetically high cholesterol, that only relates to LPA, right? LPA is the genetically high cholesterol. The rest of it is not genetically high cholesterol, right? It's not something you're doing. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're saying, okay, if this is the worst form of LDL, and this is the healthiest form of HDL, don't you think that that ratio is going to be a lot more predictive for how someone's going to do versus saying we have a group of LDL that we don't know if they're good or bad, and we have a group of HDL that we don't know if they're good or bad. So we're going to do the ratio. We're going to hope that they're going to be close. We're guessing, and we don't have to do that. Now, here's the funniest part. Before I taught you guys this test, right, years and years ago, this test's been around for a long time. I remember sitting with the rep in my office, right? He was the rep for one of the. Now we can do it at any lab place, right? But at the beginning of time, back in the ancient days when we started practicing, it was only specialty labs that would do these. And I remember sitting with the reps and I was like, hey man, listen, I just want to make sure you're clear. Like, I'm not a cardiologist. Like, I do functional medicine. I'm not a cardiologist, and he kind of chuckled and he's like, that's cool. He's like, we don't really work with cardiology. I said, what do you mean you don't work with cardiology? Like, wouldn't they be your bread and butter? Like, is this? He's like, no, they don't really want to work with us because statins don't change the type of cholesterol that you have. They just change the total number. So if you did a fractionation test like this and you saw you have really high levels of the bad one and low levels of the good one, when you go in and you just lower the total, but the high level of the bad one still stays, as an educated person, you're going to look at it and say, hey, why is this number still high? Well, it's because statins don't do anything against that. So they only measure what they can show you, like, wow, look how this lowered your cholesterol levels. And that might have lowered the good ones that you had, and it might hurt you.
Yeah.
But that's why they avoid doing it. Now, the only time statins ever change the type of cholesterol you have is if you combine it with diet and exercise. Well, geez, then what's the variable? Is it the statins or is it the diet and exercise?
Right.
Right. So it's always so ridiculous. And I don't know if you want to talk about the studies and things like that, but when I'll never forget that conversation because that's like 20 years ago now at this point, that the guy's like, no, cardiologists don't measure this because they literally can't explain it. We were talking about that last time when talking about the immune system markers, right? They took off the reference ranges. This they just ignore. So when people come in and they have real heart concerns about that, let's really test. Let's really know the answer so I can give you an honest opinion of, hey, this is what we have to fix, or really, this is high, but you're in no danger. And as they keep arbitrarily lowering and lowering the numbers, it used to be higher, it used to be 240, now they're down to 199. There's no scientific reason behind any of that. It's just literally, if you need people under 200, they're going to sell more cholesterol drugs. Right? That's literally the only reason why they're doing it. There's not like, hey, we found this out and that number is safer. Actually, they know all the studies say the opposite of that. But again, you're talking about billions of dollars of industry here and all the things that they do. So they manipulate the studies just to show that.
Yeah. And by the way, Dr. Rob and I aren't cardiologists, but there's a great book on this from Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who is a world-renowned cardiologist, called The Great Cholesterol Myth. And reading that book was just eye-opening. He talks about all of this same stuff. So we're not the ones that we're not just making this up. There's cardiologists that are sort of outside of the normal box that they try to put them in that know this stuff too. This is well known, is what I'm saying. This is certainly known information out there, and it just makes so much more sense than just trying to crash your total or to crash your LDL. Now, Doc, talk to us a little bit about HDL, because I know you say that HDL is one of the single most important markers for great health. And so, what is the HDL, and how do we get that up, and what is that a marker for?
So again, if we're leaking, HDL is going to be a great and a fast determinant. Right? Like some markers are long-term markers. HDL is going to change pretty quickly because it's basically going to see if we're leaking, if we're taking damage, if we're spilling that damage out into our structure. The more HDL we have, the better we are at mopping all that up. So if you see somebody sitting around with higher natural HDL levels, we know there's not a ton of debris in their system, right? There's not a lot of toxins. There's not a lot of leaking going on. They're not taking that much damage. Now, you can take things that can arbitrarily make your HDL on labs look higher than they actually are functioning, right? So we always have to be able to see the forest through the trees with that. But right. HDL is going to determine basically, ultimately, in the easiest way, like how fast your liver is able to process everything. So if it's high and your liver's processing fast and your liver's your engine of your metabolism, things are moving fast. Your body's able to move fast and efficient. If it's low and your engine is sluggish, your whole car is going to be sluggish, and you're going to be ultimately sluggish as well. And I think that's where, again, when we lump all of this HDL into it's all good, there's types of HDL that are not good. There's types of HDL that are damaged, that are showing that it's carrying all this extra junk. That's really the level of detail you need to get. Like you said, we're not cardiologists, but cardiologists really won't look at this unless you're on the fringe of science. But remember, they're legally obligated to prescribe you cholesterol medications if your cholesterol is high. Yeah. Legally obligated. It is the number one reason why doctors will get in trouble with the boards if they don't prescribe statins when somebody's cholesterol is high. If your cholesterol is crazy low and you have a heart attack, they are legally required to prescribe you statins. Now, you can say, I don't want to take them, and they say, that's fine, but they have to note that in your chart. Like, I tried to give it to them, and they said no. Because otherwise, there's a legal issue here, too. But it's not a matter of even necessarily cardiology. It's they always worry about the end step of plaquing, which is important. But it gives you this window into how everything is working up to that point, because we're looking at the whole body, not just what relationship it has to the heart or the blood vessels.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, I've seen patients where their cholesterol numbers are lower than they should be, and because they had a cardiac event at some point, they're on like maximum doses of statin drugs, and it's hurting them. And they don't have the sticky ones. They don't really need them, but because they had a cardiac event, doctors are adamant about putting them on statins for the rest of their life, regardless of what their numbers show.
Yeah, they always assume that every cardiac event has a plaque event to it. And the reality of it is only about 40% of them do. That's just the statistics of it. So
40% of heart attacks have to do with plaques.
Correct. Yeah.
60%.
If you get that plaque in a bad spot, you've probably heard people say, like, I have it in the widowmaker.
Yeah.
That artery's bad, right? Where you get it matters. But most of them are going to come from there. You get plaquing in other spots. But, it's always interesting talking about damage. Why don't people get like spleen attacks? Right? You have blood vessels to all these other places. Why don't you plaque in all of those places? Right? Because you're not looking at this as just right? Right? You're not looking at it from that kind of perspective, right? You're looking
I had a spleen attack.
No one has that.
Right.
Because we're always looking at saying, oh, you're plaquing because of cholesterol. If that was the case, then when we would look through your entire arterial system, we would find it everywhere. We would find attacks in other organs, and that's just not what we find. So there's a bigger picture ideology of this where it comes down to. And even further than even just heart disease, the one thing that we absolutely know, like when they did the study to determine all of this sorts of stuff, basically the studies didn't really tell us much, right? The study said, oh, there was a shocking increase. It is a 50-year study with over 5,000 people that they tracked for 50 years. They said there was a shocking increase in cholesterol levels in people who had heart attacks. You know what the shocking increase was? 11%. They had an 11% increase in cholesterol. But when they actually dug into it, people under 30 were the only ones that when their cholesterol was high, did they have a problem? Actually, the people over 50, there was no corollary to the higher cholesterol and having heart attacks. In fact, the higher their cholesterol was, the better they typically did. Part of the other problem is, one thing the study did show is if your cholesterol is too low, you need cholesterol to divide chromosomes. When you divide your cells, you need cholesterol to do that. So if those cholesterol markers were low, there was an increased incidence of cancer. So they really couldn't prove that there was an increase in heart disease, but they actually did prove that there was an increase in cancer if cholesterol was too low. The other study that they did the first study was called the Framingham study. The other study was called the Jupiter study. They did that one. They ended it early because they said, wow, there was a huge increase from the placebo group compared to the statin group. There's a huge increase. The placebo group had 12 deaths. The statin group had 12 deaths.
That's a huge difference.
So I don't know. I mean, I wasn't great at math. I was good at science. I wasn't really great at math, but I'm not, I know what numbers are. But what I did, the number I did find interesting was 9 of the 14 authors had financial conflicts.
Yeah.
So that, ultimately there's your answer.
Yeah.
There's your answer.
Yeah. Now, Doc, I don't want to misspeak on the percentage, and I'm pretty sure you know this, but for every X amount lower of cholesterol, your mortality rate goes up by X percentage. I've heard you say that several times. Do you know that quote?
Yeah. So for every 1 point that goes down, you get a 14% increase in mortality. For every 14 points you go under.
Wow.
Yeah. Every 1 milligram per deciliter goes down, you get a 14% increase in mortality rate. So the average, the healthy cholesterol for an adult, again, granted they have the right kind and those ratios are okay, is the healthiest for somebody. And when I say adult, by the way, I mean above 35.
Yeah.
I'm not talking like 90 years old, right? I'm talking above 35 is somewhere between 210 and 250. That's the healthiest range. Younger than 35, yes, you do kind of want it to be lower than that. But for the average person who's above age 35, again, the ratios matters, the balance matters. But on labs, you will flag, and they were required to give you statins if your levels are above 199. Now, the other interesting thing about statins, because we talk a lot about mitochondria, statins as their main side effect lower a marker called CoQ10. Most people, a lot of people know CoQ10 is a supplement. CoQ10 is an important part of your mitochondria. It's what allows you to burn fat, right? So fat burning makes a lot of energy, but it also burns fat, right? So it keeps people lean. Without CoQ10, you can't fat burn inside of mitochondria. Statin's main side effect is it lowers CoQ10. The other interesting thing part about CoQ10 is your CoQ10 levels, if you have a cardiac event, are one of the more determinate markers of if you live or die. If your CoQ10 is high, you have a better chance of surviving. If it's low. So the statins have a better chance of lowering your CoQ10. So if you do have a cardiac event, you have a higher chance of dying from it. So,
my goodness. Yeah.
Again, not great at math, not, I get the science pretty darn well, but I'm not sure exactly how we're able to push all this in. So that's why when we teach it, there's 7 ominous markers in blood work. 150 or fasting cholesterol under 150 is considered ominous.
Yeah.
Right? Because the body does not have the fuel that it needs in order to be able to do all the things it needs. It's not going to be able to divide your cells correctly. It's not going to be able to build your brain back. It's not going to be able to build the myelin, to build the electrical signaling. It's not going to be able to patch up. It's not going to be able to detoxify. Like you said, this poisonous molecule that we make 80% of it that we find in our body seems to do a lot of really good and healthy things for us. It helps us avoid cancers. It helps us to avoid dementias. Right. And that's why so many people, they say 35% of people who take statins have side effects. That number is way higher than that. You get the muscle aching. That number is way higher than that. Right. And it goes way beyond muscle aching. So, and then ultimately you get the fatty liver conversation. Sorry, you go.
Right.
I'm rolling.
Oh, no, that's perfect. So what Dr. Rob was talking about there, when he said ominous markers, we have a specific page of our 12 pages of blood work that we do that's a single panel for ominous markers. What ominous means is if a patient has 3 or more of those markers wrong on that panel or off on that panel, we start thinking, oncology, something major, like we need to stop, hit the brakes and take a deeper look at this. And one of those ominous markers is cholesterol below 150. And so that's a specific panel that we do that's designed, because patients always want to know when you're showing them blood work, like, do I have cancer or anything? Right. Well, that we have a specific panel for that called ominous markers. And one of the markers is too low a cholesterol. And that's what he was talking about on that.
Yeah. And when we look at the 7 of them, most of them are ratios. Right. So they're not just a single solitary marker. It's how they relate to each other, which is why you have to be able to read through the patterns of blood work. And just to touch on this quick, because I get a lot of questions about this, I'm sure you do. This entire ideology, what we're talking about, becomes the idea of fatty liver.
Yeah.
When the system gets slow and now your triglyceride levels, because your mitochondria want to burn fat, if you can't burn fat, they get stored in your liver in the form of triglycerides. So now your triglycerides get high. Your liver's getting bogged down. Your HDL starts to drop low. And the further those two guys get apart from each other, the more insulin resistance you get, which then leads to leptin problems, right? And now we're in the diabetes conversation. And now we get into heart disease because now you got metabolic syndrome, right? And fatty liver goes even deeper than that. Maybe one episode we talk about deuterium and the relationship of deuterium and fatty liver, because those guys play together. But, this idea is like, well, I have fatty liver. And I could have told you that from over there. I didn't need an ultrasound of your liver to know that that's all happening. I mean, look at these markers, right? Your liver has to get fatty because, and fatty liver just means it's getting slow. And you're building all of this excess fat into your system purely because your mitochondria can't burn it. And it always comes back to that. All these things, right? These is all fuel for mitochondria, structure for mitochondria, patching mitochondria. When you go under high stress, cholesterol, LDL, you're bad, insulate your mitochondria to make more energy. That does not sound like a poisonous thing to me.
Right. Doc, I had a patient yesterday, their triglycerides were over 1,200. I know you've seen some really high ones too.
I've seen it. Like, I remember coming out of school, they're like, nah. I remember one patient was a friend of mine, and he called me and said, my levels over 1,000. And I was like, no, that can't be. I was like newly out of school. I was like, no, that can't be. They can't get that high. And he walked in. I was like, oh my God, they are that high. And you see them, and again, these are type of markers because the whole system is going real slow, and real slow leads to shutting down.
Yeah, and so the point that Dr. Rob is trying to make is that American medical system thinking is your triglycerides are high, bring them down. But his point is that tells you so many other larger things that's going on with the energy system and the ATP and the mitochondria and the insulin and the way the body's burning fuel. There's so much more to know from that marker than just it's high, we got to force them down. And so when you look into this at the depth that we do and at the depth that he teaches, you can glean a lot of information from what these cholesterol numbers are. And is it the inflammatory ones, the sticky ones? Is it triglycerides? What is the liver enzymes doing? Are you showing signs of insulin resistance? So there's a lot of things that we're looking at other than just that marker's high, bring it down.
Yeah, that's high, bring it down. That's low, bring it up. That's very reductionist type of thinking versus looking at it like, hey man, there's a whole system. It's all got to work together. What's this doing? Why is it doing that? Well, look at these other markers. Which one does that tell you? Okay, then look at these guys. You have to kind of, have some reasonable thinking here. Like you have to, work your way through these steps versus just be cold. Be like, that's high, that's bad, lower it.
Right. Right.
It's how we end
And,
up here where we are.
right. Right. And that's why Dr. Rob named his program Beyond Functional Medicine, because we really
Yeah.
want to look beyond just those few markers and just try to bring this one up, bring that one down, and balance them out, and you're good to go. And there's way more to the story than that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Doc, sum all of this up for us with the apoprotein B, the lipoprotein A, the HDL, the triglycerides. Just kind of give us a synopsis of everything we talked about.
Yeah, cholesterol is a vital portion of your health. Okay, it's been demonized, but it is not to be demonized. Now, if your system is not working the way it's supposed to, it can damage your cholesterol and cause it to work in a way that's more harmful for you than positive. But if you need, if you're dealing with cardiac stuff, if you've got metabolic syndrome, the level of detail that we need to know that can be tested. And like now, it's not even like specialty testing. We're doing it regularly, but it is a window into a bigger picture of what your body is doing. It's not this arbitrary number that we just have to lower it because it's bad for you. We're trying to protect your heart, but we let your brain go out in the wind. This is a big picture ideology of what the whole system is doing. So don't accept that as just the correct answer. Don't just go on the statins because they tell you. Request more information. Reach out to us. Let us do it to where we can figure out what this is. Your health will be better for it if you can answer the question, why is it doing that? Versus it's stupid, it's high, pill to lower.
Right. 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 Or it just happens sometimes, or it's just all genetics.
Yeah.
There's so much more to the picture here.
Please understand that like healthcare is sick care, right?
Right.
So we have basically two sides to healthcare right now. We have healthcare, which is sick care. Somehow we've convinced people that preventative care is alternative medicine, right? So you have alternative medicine, somehow that's preventing disease as alternative, but whatever. But that leaves this gap, right? You have sick care, you have prevention, but then you go, okay, so if I'm sick, I have to stay in sick care. If I'm healthy, I can stay in prevention, but if I'm already sick, I can't prevent something I already have. So what's the middle ground? The middle ground is healing medicine. How do you heal? Well, this is the level of detail that it takes to actually heal. You've got to know this detail that Dr. Kevin spent all his time working on and learning, and I've spent all this time researching and trying to share, right? That's why we do the podcast. But that's that healing medicine on the inside. That's where people can get better. Then you can move into preventative. But that's the ideology beyond even functional medicine, right? Because it's like, well, we're going to prevent this. Well, they're already sick. You better have strategies to heal it, not just prevent it, because we're already in the game. These are the things, the levels of detail that matter.
Especially when you deal with some of the really chronic conditions that we do every day. I mean, the autoimmune, all of the thyroid, the digestive issues, all the things that we deal with every day. These people are sick. We're not playing around the edges here, guys. This isn't eat your vegetables and go exercise. People think sometimes they're going to come in and we're going to give them that perfect supplement. They're going to be good to go, off and running. We're going to change that number. This is complicated. The human body is complicated, and you really got to get to this level of the science if you want to take people from unhealthy to truly healthy for a long functional life into the future. And that's why Dr. Rob and I get up every day, is just to try to achieve that goal.
Yeah, and remember, don't get overwhelmed if you're watching this, right? By the ideology of, oh my God, I got to know all this science, right? It's our job. One of my friends says, it's my job to know how the clock works. It's your job to be able to tell what time it is,
Yeah,
right?
I
So you
love
don't have to
that.
get stuck in. You got to get stuck in the minutia all of it, right? I got to make sure I know how the clock works, so I make sure it tells time correctly. That's how we can get your body in tune. Now, I mean, we may need you to do things in order to help us out to do that. But at the same time, you don't have to know all of this sorts of stuff. Like, it took us 25 years, and I'm still learning stuff every single day. Healthcare stuff changes really quickly. You have to have understanding of the body, you have to understand the chemistry, you have to understand the physics, and then you have to understand all of that. That just tells you what it is. Then you got to have the whole other side of how do we work on this on people? How do you get this to improve for people, right? How can we expedite these processes? That's a whole ideology within there too. And so that big picture, don't we share the science so that you understand and you understand the importance of it. But don't get bogged down by that, because I promise you that the steps to fixing these stuff, it's our job to eat the complexity. Right? I tell patients all the time, you don't have to know every single step of this. It's my job to eat the complexity. Same time, it's my tax accountant's job to eat the complexity. I don't want to know tax code. God bless him for being excited. My accountant's super excited about tax code. He thinks it's the coolest thing he's ever read. I don't want to know a single word he's saying. I'm like, hey, is this legal? How much do I owe? Where do I sign? Those are my three questions.
Right.
Right. But he's passionate about it because he's the expert in it. Right.
Right.
Unfortunately, if you get a sickness, if you get a diagnosis, it's like getting audited. Now all of a sudden you got to know some tax code. Now you got to pay a little bit more attention. But it's the point of sharing this information is this isn't mysterious anymore. In 2026, we're not confused about what's happening. We're not like, oh, we can't figure this out. We don't know what causes this. That's nonsense. The science is there, but like Doc said, we're 30 years behind the research, and that's probably even being polite.
Wow. Very well said, man. Well, so the bottom line is cholesterol is not a villain. Your body needs it, but you want the right ones in the right places at the right levels, right? Well,
Yeah.
Doc, thanks a lot, man. This was great. I hope we dispelled some of the myths out there about cholesterol. And I think we had another good one, man. This was great.
Yeah, we're on track for another good one.
On track for another good one. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. If you guys want more information, check us out on our website. And if you know somebody with high cholesterol, send them and share this with us. Send this to them. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.